And we are back, moving into our second conversation for this morning as we are joined by educator and author Delmer Tzib, here to talk about his new publication. And it's called Critical Thinking Project. Very interesting. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Delmer.
All right. So, Delmer, it's great to have you here. And clearly, you do additional work outside of the classroom.
Yes.
In putting this together. Let's talk about why you decided you wanted to publish this.
Well, one of the things about educating is that we always incorporate, especially at St. John's College, since we follow a Jesuit philosophy of education, it is about a call to action. And I've always been a fan of Paulo Freire, who also, in his writings, calls for action. And within the classroom, what we do is that Jesuit education is based on 3 principles. Which is experience, whereby we indulge students in a process whereby they are connecting their experiences, their life experiences with what is happening, the content in the classroom and what they are seeing in the environment and society. Reflection, whereby they're thinking about what is happening in relation to what they know and what they see in society. And lastly, action, which is where they use what they know to create something. And I think that process of authentic learning and is a process that merits analysis and merits reading from other teachers and people as a whole, because what we're talking about is the environment and we're talking about also development. So I thought that looking at development from a critical historical perspective as how it relates to a student and how the student sees it was very important for the Belizean society, especially at this juncture where going into 2020, and with that vision, I think it was very important.
Critical thinking is a skill that we talk about very often, and as teachers, I'm sure it should be ideally what you're working towards building in your students. How do you, first of all, it's called critical thinking, so I want you to explain that a bit more, but also tie in your experience as to how you feel we're doing in how we educate in developing critical thinking skills in our young ones.
So critical thinking is basically thinking about the environment. It's the environment based, but it's also development based. Why? Because what we've been looking at is that themes such as development are very contemporary in our society today, but yet I teach history. So for some, it may seem disconnected that we're talking about a contemporary issue in a historical context. Yet, when we were discussing particularly about the British occupation of British Honduras and the beginning of it, we began to discuss about development for what, development for who. In the context of when the British came in, the area was not empty. The Maya were way in the southern area and the western area. But we could say, okay, that area is underdeveloped. Then the British came in, cut down some trees, wanted the logwood, built a hut. Would that be development? And then we look at development for who, development for what? Did it benefit the Maya that were there at that point? And that's how the discussion basically started into the impact of development on the environment itself and how it relates to contemporary issues. In relation to critical thinking, I believe that we are in the educational system, we are in a transition. I've been through the educational system of the University of Belize, and there is a lot more focus on authentic assessments, on what they call alternative assessments, moving from the traditional of only tests and quizzes. And what I saw from this project in particular is that the students are developing a lot more skills through doing something and through analyzing and feeling important in that process. Throughout this process, I saw students, I wouldn't call it fight, but argue with each other, planning, creating reports about it. And all of these skills are things that probably a test wouldn't give you, probably a quiz wouldn't give you.
May I jump in to say this?
Yes.
I am glad that the education system is moving in that particular course. Simply because when you look at it from a historic point of view, many of us were only taught to process the information being taught to us in the classroom, but we weren't necessarily taught how to apply it in a real life setting. And I think because of that, most of us come out with this academic knowledge and not necessarily the ability to implement and co-op in a real situation like the workplace or society on a whole. you find that a lot of children are lacking the skills to be able to think critically because of that. And one would say, where does it come from? Does it come from the home? Does it come from the classroom? Perhaps it's a combination of both. Where do you see that now in the context of this particular publication?
Well, in education, there is something called the hidden curriculum, where what you are promoting is values, belief systems, and ways of thinking, morals. Yeah. And precisely that's something that I observed. My top students in relation to, the A+ students were struggling a bit with being able to lead a group or being able to cope with working with others. And working with others is also an issue. A lot of our students that are coming up tend to want to work alone because they say, look, I can do it alone, so let me just work alone. But the reality is when you get out there, you have to work with people, and you have to work with some people that are really responsible, and you have to work with people that are negligent.
So let me challenge you by saying this then, and you're the teacher in the classroom. I was once a student, and so we see things. You were once a student yourself too, so we see things from certain perspectives, right? You find that a lot of students choose to be loners in a manner of speaking because the moment you pair them up with someone else or put them in a group, you have people who coast and get the same grade. And then you will have one person who, because they want to see themselves successful in that project or undertaking, do the lion's share of the work. So you find that, okay, well, perhaps it's easier for me to go at it alone than to take on the burden of having to hold someone's hand who's lazy, who will still get the same A. And it's a mentality that they go through in life, because once you form that seed there, you automatically carry on in that manner.
Well, I think in education, that's why everything is planned. So there are several stages of reports that they have to bring forward. And in that process, you have to make it clear. If you do not work, you do not pass. And that's why I always make it clear to my students as well. If you report to me that they did not work the day you're presenting the project, and you did not tell me throughout the reporting process, then there's an issue there. So you need to tell me from the beginning, he's not working, he's not. I look at report 1, report 2, report 3, and you are saying that he did not work, then obviously he did not work. But if you tell me until you're presenting, then there's an issue. And again, it's all about building that skill of, look, I have to report, so I need to be accountable to what I'm doing, and I need to hold my partners accountable. And again, that's a challenge. It's a challenge to them, because many of them feel like, oh, he's my friend, so I just have to give him, just let him ride. But the issue arises when they feel that it's unjust, because probably, let's say, for instance, they did their work, but their quality is not as high as another group, then they will feel threatened about that and bring forward what was happening.
And it's such an interesting topic. I think we could go on about this for a long time. Because, what Isani pointed out is a very real situation, but then I think it's removing education from what its purpose is, which is preparation for real life. And you said it so clearly before, what you deal with in real life is completely different from the controlled environment in a school. And so that's what I think is interesting about this what you're explaining with your critical thinking. Because there's a lot of environmental talk that's taking place. There's a lot of it, we have children who are the advocates for climate change and bringing a focus to it. But what you have allowed them to do is to dive into beyond just what the science books are saying, to understand it for themselves. How surprised are you in what they were able to develop?
Well, let me just explain the concept itself first. So critical thinking is basically taking the works of persons such as Carlos Lito Quiros, which is a Belizean artist right here, pictured right here, along with a Cuban artist, Falco. And what I learned from them, because I've been learning a lot from them, is that many times I tend to think and try to find ways of explaining complex content that they summarize in one image. And so infographic is something that is coming up and is creating a lot of thinking. Why? Because it's very visual, but they're at the same time challenging a lot of the accepted norms in society. So these are world issues that they're creating. But as you can see, look at this graphic. This summarizes something that can be discussed in a complex manner, but it's one image. So what the students did is that they took those images, recreated them in 3D representations, and then had to interpret it from their own eyes. So this is what I think about it, and this is why I think it's important to talk about it. Of course, always looking at the concepts of development and the environment. And I was surprised by many of their reflections because honestly, as I said, I look at it from a historical perspective. And when they begin to relate it to their life and say, you know what, it relates to me because I see trees going down, I see the garbage all around.
Yeah.
And and I was looking at Mr. Williams saying his statement earlier, and I do believe it's part of culture. Yeah. And we do need to switch some of these things to say, look, I am also guilty of it. And part of this project was that, to have the students say, realize I have a role in this world, and if I want to change it, I need to start with me, and I then need to tell everybody else, let's switch this culture of just throwing garbage and then blaming the government or blaming the people that pick up the garbage, and say, look, I want change, I need to start.
What you're describing...
What was the most surprising comments that you got from the students, that you realized that they perhaps went even deeper than you thought in analyzing the issues?
There was one image by Carlos Lito Quiroz, which is a heart with a gas pumping gas into the heart, and then there were missiles coming out of the heart. And what struck me very deep is this precisely one right there. This group in particular did an excellent job at analyzing that image, because they were saying, look, we look at World War I, World War II, and it's all world powers fighting for some sort of economic control. And in this case, the war is about the gasoline, about petroleum. And all of this war is just causing so much injustice in the world, and they're displacing people, innocent people that are trying to survive. So that, to me, the level of analysis that they reached, I did not expect it for, they're just 14, 15-year-olds, so second farmers. So they are thinking already, and that's what the image and the project itself wanted them to do.
When you look at something like this, though, while it encourages students to be able to think critically, it also kind of forces them to open their minds in terms of being able to think freely. Yeah. Because you could view this as art, and the interpretation of art could be subjective, as subjective as it gets, right? Yeah. So that while they may be able to see this as a gas pump and as several bombs being dropped or pumped out of the heart, someone else can come in with a totally different interpretation of how that is. And technically they wouldn't be wrong because it's their perspective and their interpretation, right? Do you find that perhaps with this particular lesson that other students perhaps saw things totally differently from the channel that you would have wanted them to be able to think or carry through it? Well,
one of the things about FAIR is practically making the classroom a democratic area. Yeah. I call it a liberated space. And the students had to do a presentation about it, and the class discussed. And many of them had some contrasting views about it. And in fact, the process was that, because within the group, you have 5 to 6 persons in the group. And some of them had some contrasting views about the image itself. But they came to one understanding and placed an analysis to it. But I think that's the beauty of the process. Because you will realize that from one particular fact, and we're talking, I relate it to history again, from one particular fact, you may have 20 interpretations. And who am I in this case to tell one you're right, you're wrong, you're the truth, you're a false interpretation?
At the heart of this, from what I'm seeing, is that there is a symbiosis between development and environment.
Yes.
But for whatever reason, we tend to want to separate the two without seeing the actual effect one has on the other.
And history too.
That's 3 things. Can I just tell you, I think history, now, I mean, you triggered my critical thinking skills. But I'm watching these images and I'm reading some of the captions, and I just think to myself, you said earlier history and what are you doing with environment? I mean, let's look at the environmental changes we're talking about. Now it's going back to our history. We're talking about VATs and market bags and, you know, everything that was developed based on convenience. We are stepping back from it because it's not as good for the environment as we thought.
It's not only about...
There's some history there.
It's not only about convenience. It's also... okay, let me backtrack a bit about the reasons for colonization, let's say. First, the Spanish came into America with saving souls. That was their first excuse. Then you have the other European powers coming in to civilize people because, according to them...
So from missionary and conversion to civilization.
Then you have now the spread of democracy and progress and development. And it continues to be sort of excuses to come in and tell people what to do and undermine what their lifestyles were. For instance, I was looking at some news from Guatemala where the full community has went back to using plantain leaves for wrapping and all of those things. That is something that is traditional. It was there. It was undermined because something else came in. And something else that was more profitable came in.
Single-use plastics came in. So
Yes,
we departed from what was eco-friendly and biodegradable, which was the banana leaves, right?
Yes.
Valid point.
But even
Not
so,
convenience, but more a matter of somebody, you know, somebody brings in something new and novel.
It's a commercial.
And tells you it's good, and they're making money
but
from
your
it.
culture is bad.
Yeah.
What you're doing
what
is bad.
I'm
So-
doing is
so
antiquated.
it isn't efficient. But we're going back to it now.
Yeah.
The only difference is that we're going back to that with a brand attached to it.
So it's still commercial.
Yes.
It's almost a merger of
Yeah, so it's still commercial, but we're going back to some of those traditional
It's
things.
all in the packaging, bro.
Exactly. So again, it comes back to the concepts of development, the environment, and how it relates to history, and how it's been evolving over time. So again, what I was trying to do, and I think to an extent I was successful, is allow students to think about it. Just think. And I always reach into the class and say, because some of them got frustrated with the images, I won't deny that some of them were like, what is this trying to tell me? I spoke to my father, and my father is saying that he can't get it, you understand? And
What
then-
kind of history project
yeah,
is
like, and
Call
so,
the principal and say, do you know what your teacher's doing? Yeah.
no, but some of them got frustrated, and to an extent I was happy that they got frustrated.
Yeah.
Because that's what I wanted. I wanted them to start to open their minds and say, okay, probably my little space of the world right here isn't all the world at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much out there.
Yeah.
And
So-
that is a challenge, you know, is because we cocoon ourselves so much that our world only exists in an immediate sphere or circle around us, but it's so vast and so much wider than that. But we limit ourselves to the persons that we interact with daily or the things that we know because it's right there in front of us.
Yeah.
We don't go beyond or outside of the box, so to speak.
So you put this all into a publication.
Yeah, it is.
And it's where is it available? How can people see it so they can find out more?
Well, this publication is electronic.
Okay.
So again, it's
So
a
it's-
team of people that are working. I must give credit to Carlos, Lito Quiroz, Falco, of course, Alex
Yeah.
Falco Chang, and Yasser Musa, who is the designer, and I just do the research and part of the write-up, and of course get the project going
and
for the
kids
students. Yeah, and
conceptualize
then,
the idea.
so this is all the projects from Second Farm in
Fantastic.
at St. John's College. So it is all a group of people working together. And the project itself and the publication itself is also serves as an inspiration for our students.
Yeah.
They like you see these pictures here, I showed them in class and they are like, whoa, I am
Yeah.
on a public, I'm
Yeah.
on a book, you know,
And
my
now it's
picture
on
is there.
TV.
Yeah. So
Even
like,
though you were complaining about the project.
yeah. But
No, and I think this is such a great project, and I think what you have done is it's forcing the kids, and even forcing us here in this conversation to think beyond face value, and we really need to encourage more people in our system. They went home and they probably had to challenge their parents, because you know parents can be very hands-on with projects, to think beyond just the norm and looking deeper at cause and effect and our own personal contributions. So definitely, are you going to continue it? Is it replicated beyond second form?
well, it's a model already. It's out
Yeah.
there, so anybody can just use it, and that's
Yeah.
precisely what the publication is all about too. So it tells you a background to it,
Yeah.
what was the research about the topic,
Yeah.
and then it tells you a detailed description of what the project was and how the students carried it out. And then it gives you the project or the reflections from the students and the pictures of what they created. So it's a guide that anybody can just take and say, okay, I want to replicate it at my school. And they can just read it, follow it, and they should have the... I'm not sure if it will be the similar outcome, but
Yeah.
at least a guided outcome to it.
All right. Well, Delmer, thank you so much for coming in and telling us all about it. Where can they access the Yeah,
It's
ebook?
at the Image Factory website.
Image Factory website.
And it's posted on social media as well. So you can go to my page and it's there. So
Nice.
you can just, click on it and it takes you to the slides.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and telling us all about the work you've been doing with the kids and their
you.
fantastic work as well.
Yeah, it is.
All right.
Thank
We're
you.
going to go ahead and take a break. And I think you're going to like this one because we're actually going to be talking about wrapping presents and using creative objects that we have on hand. So that's coming up after the break. Please stay tuned.